You know that generation people love to blame for everything? The one they call too sensitive, too lazy, too online, too easily offended, too anxious, too entitled, and somehow also the generation that works multiple side hustles, teaches itself new skills overnight, and can smell fake from a mile away. You're Gen Z or you're close to it, and it feels like you're always being watched through a microscope by people who don't live in your reality. They'll tell you you've got it easy. But you've never experienced easy. You've experienced speed, pressure, noise, comparison, and a constant sense that the floor can drop at any time. So if you've ever felt misunderstood by older generations or even by your own friends, this is why. Here's the truth slap. Gen Z isn't soft. Gen Z is overstimulated, undersecured, and unusually awake. You didn't grow up in a world that slowly introduced you to reality. You grew up with reality in your pocket. Bad news with breakfast, perfect bodies at lunch, wars, climate dread, layoffs, scams, and how to get rich at 19, videos before bedtime. And when a nervous system grows up in that kind of environment, it adapts. Not always in cute ways, but in ways that make sense. Psychologists talk about something simple. Your brain learns what the world is by what repeats. If instability repeats, you become hyper alert. If comparison repeats, you become self-critical. If performance repeats, you become anxious about being ordinary. That's not a personality flaw, that's conditioning. Now, I'm going to add one nuance right away because this topic gets messy fast. Not every Gen Z person is the same. Culture, country, family, and money change everything. Some people had stable childhoods, some didn't, some had supportive parents, some raised themselves. So this isn't a label. It's a lens, but if you're Gen Z, there are a few psychological patterns you're more likely to recognize than older generations will. Here's the hidden mechanism. Your generation learned to live in public, even when you're alone. Because social media didn't just show you other people's lives, it trained you to imagine an audience while you live yours. When you laugh, part of you wonders how it would look on camera. When you succeed, part of you measures whether it's impressive enough. When you fail, part of you feels like it's permanent because it could be screenshotted. This is why Gen Z can feel self-aware to the point of exhaustion. You're not just living, you're constantly interpreting yourself. And if you're thinking, yeah, that's exactly it, let me give you a scene. It's late at night, the room is quiet, your phone is inches from your face. You're scrolling through people your age who look like they already won. One is traveling, one is rich, one is ripped, one is engaged, one is healed, one is discipline maxing, one is acting like they've got life figured out. You toss the phone down and stare at the ceiling, and your chest feels heavy. Not because you want their life, but because you feel like you're behind in a race you never agreed to enter. That feeling, quiet panic mixed with numbness, that's a very Gen Z kind of pressure. So here's a framework. 4 Gen Z psychologies that explain most of what people misunderstand about you. You might be one or a mix. The first is the hyper-context mind. You don't accept simple answers. You want the full picture. You see systems, power dynamics, hidden incentives, why something is trending, who benefits, what's being sold. Older generations sometimes call that overthinking. But for you, it's survival. You grew up in an era of misinformation and marketing disguised as truth. So you question everything. The second is the performance-exhausted heart. You want authenticity, but you've been forced to perform to be noticed. You've watched people monetize their personality, brand their trauma, sell their glow up. So you crave realness, but you're also suspicious of it. You want to be seen, but the cost of being seen feels high. That push-pull creates anxiety, detachment, and that I don't care mask that's actually just protection. The third is the stability-hungry nervous system. You watched adults break, relationships collapse, jobs disappear, prices rise, the future look uncertain. So you want stability, but you don't trust it. You want love, but you don't trust it. You want a career, but you don't trust it. This is why so many Gen Z people look independent on the outside, not because you don't need people, because you learned not to rely on promises. The fourth is the meaning-first drive. This one makes people angry because it exposes them. You don't want to suffer just to prove you're tough. You don't worship titles the same way. You ask, why am I doing this? And if the answer is, because that's how it's always been, you don't respect it. That's not entitlement. That's a values revolution. You'd rather make less money and keep your soul than make more money and lose yourself. At least that's what many of you are trying to do. And here's the paradox. The same awareness that makes Gen Z powerful can also make Gen Z fragile. Because if you see too much too soon, it can be hard to feel hope. If you're constantly analyzing the system, you can end up feeling trapped by it. If you're constantly curating yourself, you can lose your identity underneath the performance. And that's the cost. The cost is a kind of quiet fatigue that older generations don't always recognize. Not "I'm tired" fatigue. I'm tired of pretending I'm okay while my brain never stops fatigue. It can show up as doom scrolling, procrastination, numbness, overworking, or that strange cycle where you're incredibly ambitious and then suddenly can't move. And because people don't see the internal pressure, they label the external behavior lazy, flaky, dramatic. But what's actually happening is you're trying to build a life while carrying a constant low-level sense of instability. Now here's your self-test. Don't overthink it, just answer. When you imagine your future, what do you feel first? Excitement or tension? If your first emotion is tension, your nervous system is treating the future like a threat. That doesn't mean you're weak. It means your environment taught you to brace. So how do you upgrade this? How do you keep the strengths of Gen Z without getting crushed by the pressure? 3 steps. First, stop living in the audience and return to the room. You need daily moments where you do something with zero performance attached. No posting, no documenting, no how it looks. Just reality. Walk without music. Eat without scrolling. Create without showing it. That sounds small, but it retrains your brain to feel safe being unseen. Second, trade information for boundaries. Gen Z is great at absorbing content, but absorbing isn't the same as building. You don't need more advice. You need fewer inputs and more consistency. Pick 2 sources you trust. Drop the rest for 30 days. Replace doom scrolling with one concrete habit: sleep, movement, or learning. Not all 3, one, because stability is built through repetition, not intensity. Third, build real-world anchors. Digital life is fast and unstable. Real life is slower and steadier. So you need anchors that don't vanish when the algorithm changes, a skill you can practice, a community you can show up to, a relationship you can deepen, a craft you can improve. Your generation has insane potential, but potential without anchors turns into anxiety. And yes, sometimes you will feel out of place because you're early. A lot of Gen Z values, mental health awareness, boundaries, authenticity, questioning systems are ahead of the emotional maturity of the world you inherited. That doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're carrying the awkward phase of change. So let me end with this. Gen Z isn't a broken generation. It's a generation raised in bright light. Too much information, too much comparison, too much access. And when you're raised in bright light, you either become obsessed with being seen or you learn to protect your inner world like it's sacred. If you're Gen Z, you don't need to become tougher by becoming colder. You need to become steadier by becoming quieter inside, not less ambitious, less invaded. So comment one thing. Which one hit you most? Hypercontext, performance exhausted, stability hungry, or meaning first? And if you want more psychology that helps you understand yourself without being shamed for how you adapted, like the video, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Because your generation isn't behind, it's awake, and that changes everything.